The wind screamed across the frozen hills, and snow danced like white ghosts in the dark night. Evan pulled his heavy coat tighter as he walked the edge of the camp, his boots sinking deep in the ice with every step, and the cold biting into his skin even through the thick fabric. The air was thin and sharp, making every breath feel like tiny knives in his chest, and the sky above was a black sea, broken only by the pale shimmer of two distant moons. The only sound was the endless rush of the storm and the faint creak of the camp walls in the wind. But then Evan saw it, a small flicker of light moving far out on the snowy plain. It was too small for a drone, and too steady for a wild spark in the storm, so he stopped and crouched low. Watching it draw closer, a shape appeared in the swirling snow, small, thin, and stumbling through the drifts, and the light was not from a torch, but from the figure itself, a faint blue glow like frost on metal. Evan felt his pulse quicken, his hand sliding to the grip of his rifle. As the figure came into focus, it was not human. The skin was pale, almost silver under the blue glow, and long white hair whipped in the wind. The eyes were large, bright, and the color of glacial ice, and they looked right at him with something between fear and desperation. She was dressed in strange, thin cloth that clung to her like wet paper, and her bare arms shook violently in the cold. She stumbled once, then fell to her knees in the snow, the glow from her body dimming, as if fading away with her strength. Evan hesitated. His training told him not to make contact with unknown aliens without command approval, but the storm was deadly, and she would not survive long out here. He stepped forward slowly, lowering his weapon and raising one hand in a calm gesture. She looked up at him, breathing fast, her lips moving in words he did not understand. He could hear the wind howling around them, but beneath it, there was another sound, a low, distant hum that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Evan glanced around, but saw nothing through the swirling snow. He offered his hand to her, and she stared at it for a long moment, before taking it with trembling fingers. Her skin was colder than ice. He pulled her up and supported her weight as they moved toward his tent, each step slow and heavy in the deep snow. The hum in the distance grew faint again, but it did not vanish, and Evan kept looking over his shoulder into the night inside the tent. The warmth hit them like a wall, and the girl sagged in his arms, almost collapsing onto the floor. Evan set her down on a thick blanket and quickly sealed the flap against the wind. He poured water into a small cup and held it to her lips. She drank greedily, and her eyes softened slightly. Still she kept glancing toward the flap as if expecting something to burst through at any moment. Evan tried to speak, but she shook her head slowly, pointing to her throat and then making a motion with her hands as if breaking something. He guessed she could not speak his language, maybe not speak at all. She reached to the side, and with a shaky finger, drew a symbol in the frost on the inside wall, 3 circles with a single slash cutting through them. Her hand trembled as she did it, and her eyes locked on his with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Evan had no idea what the mark meant, but the way she looked at it made him think it was a warning. The tent walls shook under a heavy blast of wind, and the light from the heater flickered. Evan sat near the flap listening. The wind howled, but underneath it he thought he heard that strange hum again, this time joined by sharp clicking noises like metal claws tapping on stone. The girl tensed, her body stiff and her breath quick. Evan picked up his rifle and checked the charge, his heart beating hard. The clicking grew a little louder, then stopped. The silence felt heavier than the storm outside. Evan met her eyes and saw raw fear there, the kind of fear that comes from knowing what hunts you. She reached out and gripped his arm, her fingers still icy cold. She shook her head slowly, as if telling him not to go outside. Evan did not move. He sat still in the tense, quiet, with the storm roaring around the camp, and the strange noises out in the dark somewhere beyond the tent. Something was moving. Something was searching. The storm outside did not weaken. It pressed against the tent like a living thing. Claws of wind and snow, scratching at the fabric walls, and making the poles groan with every gust. Evan sat with his rifle resting across his lap, his eyes fixed on the entrance flap, while the alien girl huddled close to the heater, her silver skin glowing faintly in the dim light. The sound from outside came again, low and distant. At first, then sharper, a series of clicks that seemed to echo through the snow itself. The girl stiffened, and her glowing eyes locked on the tent flap as if she could see right through it. Evan whispered to her, asking if it was an animal or a machine, but she only shook her head, her hair falling over her face as she moved closer to him. She reached toward the floor, and in the thin frost, drew the same strange mark again, 3 circles with a single slash through them, her hand trembling, as if the act of making the sign brought fear. Evan studied it, trying to guess its meaning. Maybe it was a warning, maybe it meant danger or enemy, but before he could ask, another sound rose in the storm. It was not a click this time, but a heavy thump, like something big and strong stepping down into the snow, followed by a second step, and then another. The step stopped, and the clicks returned, this time sharper, faster. Closer, Evan slowly unzipped the side of the tent just enough to peer into the night. The wind struck his face like icy knives, and snow rushed in, stinging his eyes. Shapes moved between the alien trees, dark, tall, and wrong. He could not see them clearly. But they were not human, their limbs bent in strange angles, and their heads glowed faintly with cold green light. One of the shapes stopped, turned its head and tilted it, as if listening. Evan froze, holding his breath. The girl was motionless behind him. The shape moved again, walking with an insect-like precision through the drifts. Evan let the flap fall back into place, sealing out the snow. He turned to the girl and saw her watching him with wide eyes. He pointed toward the flap and held up 2 fingers, then tapped his ear to show that he had heard 2 of them, but she shook her head and held up 5. Evan's chest tightened. There were more out there, hidden in the storm. The girl reached out and gripped his sleeve, pulling him toward the back of the tent. Her voice came as a whisper, broken and halting, but clear enough to send a chill down his spine. Not fight, hide. The wind howled louder, and the clicks scraped through it like claws on glass. Something brushed against the side of the tent, a faint sliding sound that made the fabric shiver. Evan raised his rifle, the heater's light flickering across his tense face. Then came another sound, soft but distinct, a deep rumbling hum that seemed to vibrate in his bones. The girl flinched and covered her ears, her breath coming fast. Evan could feel the hum deep in his chest, as if it were pulling at the air inside the tent. The clicks moved in a circle outside the tent, the shapes pacing like predators, closing in. Evan thought about calling for backup, but the storm would block the signal, and even if it went through, help would take too long to arrive. The girl looked at him with pleading eyes, then pointed toward the floor under the blankets and gear, as if telling him there was a way out. Evan moved the supplies aside and saw a faint seam in the ground, a hatch covered in frost and dirt. The hum outside grew louder, the fabric of the tent trembling as if something heavy leaned against it. One sharp click rang out, much closer than before, right beside the flap. The girl pressed her finger to her lips and mouthed one word, hide. Evan knelt by the hatch and scraped away the ice, revealing a small metal handle. He pulled, and the hatch lifted with a soft hiss, releasing a puff of warm air from below. The girl climbed down first, moving with surprising speed for someone so weak. Evan followed, closing the hatch just as a shadow fell across the tent's entrance. From below he could hear the faint rustle of movement. Above them the sound of claws on fabric, and the slow thud of heavy steps circling the tent. The space under the hatch was a narrow tunnel, with smooth walls and a low ceiling, the air warmer but carrying a strange metallic scent. The girl moved ahead, in silence, her glow faintly lighting the way, her long hair swaying with each careful step. Evan kept his rifle ready, glancing back at the hatch above, where faint silhouettes shifted against the dim light. The clicks faded, but the hum remained pulsing, like a heartbeat in the dark. After a few minutes, the tunnel opened into a small chamber, lined with strange markings glowing faintly on the walls. The girl turned to him, her face still pale, but her breathing calmer. She pointed at the symbols, then at herself, and then at him, as if saying they were now part of this together. Evan did not understand the meaning, but he understood the feeling. Whatever was outside was still looking for her, and now for him, and they were not safe yet. The chamber walls glowed faintly, casting soft blue light across the strange carvings that twisted in patterns Evan had never seen before. The air was warmer here, but heavy, with a metallic taste that clung to his tongue and made every breath feel slow. The alien girl sat on the floor, her knees drawn close, her glowing eyes fixed on the tunnel they had come from, as if waiting for something to follow. Evan kept his rifle ready, the hum from above still thrumming through the stone ceiling in slow, deep waves. Then came the clicks again, faint at first, then sharper, echoing down into the chamber like icy needles in the dark. The girl's head snapped up, her body tense, every muscle ready to move. Evan's eyes darted to the tunnel, and he could see a faint shadow flicker across the glow of the chamber walls. They were here. The girl stood and pointed toward a narrow passage at the far side of the room, her hand trembling but her steps quick. Evan followed, his boots scraping on the smooth stone floor, his eyes never leaving the tunnel behind him. A faint shape appeared in the mouth of the tunnel, tall and thin, moving with a strange segmented grace, its head tilting side to side like an insect tasting the air. Its eyes glowed green like 2 shards of broken crystal. In the dark, Evan's grip on his rifle tightened, but the girl shook her head fiercely, her eyes wide with urgency. She wanted him to run. They slipped into the narrow passage, the walls so close that his shoulders brushed both sides, the blue glow fading. As they moved deeper, the clicks grew louder, now joined by a strange, dry hiss, like steam escaping from broken metal. Evan glanced back and saw another shadow, sliding into the chamber behind the first, their movements fast but deliberate, like hunters who knew their prey had nowhere to go. The passage dipped downward, and the air grew colder, the stone beneath their feet damp and slick. The girl moved quickly, despite her thin frame, her bare feet making almost no sound. Evan followed close behind every step, measured every sound from behind, sending his heart pounding. A sudden sharp clatter rang out from the tunnel behind them, something striking the wall hard, sending a tremor through the stone. The girl flinched, but did not slow. She pointed ahead, where a faint light glimmered at the end of the passage. They burst out into a wider space, the ceiling lost in shadow, and the floor uneven with jagged stones and shallow pools of dark water. The light came from cracks in the walls, where a strange pale glow seeped through, like moonlight trapped inside the stone itself. Evan took a step forward, then froze as the sound of water splashing echoed from the darkness above. He looked up and saw them, two of the tall insect shapes clinging to the wall, high above their limbs, moving in unnatural bends as they crawled down toward the floor. The girl grabbed his arm and pulled him toward a cluster of stone pillars, half collapsed, but still offering some cover. They ducked behind them, just as the first hunter dropped to the ground with a soft thud, its clawed feet sinking slightly into the damp earth. It turned its head, slowly scanning the cavern, its green eyes cutting through the dark. Evan could hear his own breath too loud in the silence. The girl's hand pressed lightly against his shoulder, as if telling him to stay still. The second hunter landed a few meters away, its head twitching toward the faint glow from the cracks in the wall. It clicked to the first, and the sound made Evan's skin crawl. The first moved toward the far side of the cavern, its claws scraping the stone, while the second stayed closer, its head turning toward their hiding place. Evan's muscles tightened, ready to fire if it came closer, but before he could act, a deep roar of wind rushed through the cavern, shaking dust from the ceiling and sending ripples across the pools of water. The hunters froze, their heads snapping toward a dark opening in the far wall. The girl's eyes lit with urgency. She tugged at Evan's arm, pointing toward that same opening. He hesitated for only a heartbeat before they sprinted low across the floor. Keeping to the shadows, the hunters turned too late, the roar of wind masking their footsteps just long enough to reach the far side. They slipped into the opening, the walls narrowing again, until they were swallowed by darkness. Behind them, the clicks grew furious, echoing through the cavern as the hunters gave chase. The tunnel twisted sharply, forcing them to turn again and again, the air rushing past them, colder and sharper than before. Evan's lungs burned, but the girl did not slow. She moved as if she knew every turn, every dip in the stone. The clicks grew louder, closing the distance, until Evan could almost feel the hunters at his back. Then the tunnel opened again, this time into a narrow ledge overlooking a deep chasm. The wind screaming up from below, the girl pointed across where a thin bridge of stone stretched over the drop, barely wide enough for one person. Without a word, she stepped onto it, her bare feet gripping the rough surface as she moved quickly over the void. Evan followed, his eyes fixed ahead, not daring to look down. Halfway across, a sharp cracking sound split the air, and he glanced back to see the first hunter at the tunnel mouth, its claws scraping the stone as it stepped onto the bridge. The girl reached the far side and turned, holding out her hand. Evan pushed forward the bridge, shaking under his weight. The hunter was closing in, its glowing eyes fixed on him, unblinking. Evan leapt the last step to the far side, and the girl slammed her hand against a panel in the wall. The bridge cracked and fell away into the darkness, taking the hunter with it. The clicks faded into the wind, but the hum began again, deeper and closer than before. The hum vibrated through the wall beside them, a slow, deep pulse that seemed to come from somewhere far below the ground, yet it shook the stone, as if the whole place were alive. Evan looked at the girl, but she was already moving, her glowing skin casting faint light on the narrow passage ahead. They moved quickly through the twisting corridor, the air growing colder with each step, until their breath formed thick clouds in the dim light. The sound of the hum followed them, never fading, and behind it, faint and distant, the soft clicking of the hunters echoed like an unwelcome memory. The passage ended at a round metal door, half covered in frost. The girl pressed her palm to its surface, and it lit with a faint blue glow. Before sliding open without a sound, cold wind roared in, flooding the corridor, and carrying with it a swirl of snowflakes. Beyond the door, the frozen wilderness stretched out under a sky of swirling clouds and pale moonlight, the snow sweeping across the ground in long white waves. The girl stepped out first, pulling her thin cloth closer around her shoulders. Evan followed, his boots sinking into the deep drifts. The wind howled through the skeletal remains of alien trees, their twisted branches reaching like claws toward the black sky. The girl pointed toward a ridge in the distance, her eyes sharp with urgency. Evan understood they had to reach it before the hunters found them again. They moved fast, but the snow was deep, and the wind fought them with every step. Evan kept scanning the shadows between the trees, the storm hiding shapes that might be real, only tricks of the light. The hum grew softer for a moment, but then a faint new sound cut through the storm. a sharp chittering that carried far in the thin air. The girl froze her head. Tilting slightly, her eyes narrowing in fear, Evan knew they were close. He gestured for her to keep moving, and they pushed forward, the ridge looming larger with each step. Halfway there, the chittering grew louder, now joined by a deep rhythmic thump, as if something heavy moved across the snow. Evan glanced back and saw dark shapes emerging from the storm, tall and thin, their movements too smooth to be human, their green eyes burning through the snow haze. The girl grabbed his arm and pulled him harder, forcing their pace. The ridge was steep, and the snow made it slick. Evan dug his boots into the slope as they climbed, the wind slamming into them like a wall. The shapes behind them moved faster than he expected, covering ground with long strides that seemed effortless. In the deep snow, Evan reached the top of the ridge, first pulling the girl up beside him on the other side. A narrow valley stretched down toward jagged rocks and a cluster of frozen structures, half buried in ice. The girl pointed toward them and started down the slope. The descent was faster, but far more dangerous, the snow hiding uneven ground and deep drops. Evan slipped once, catching himself on a rock, his hands burning from the cold. The hunters were at the top of the ridge, now their clicking echoing down the valley. The girl reached the first of the frozen structures, pressing her hand to the door, but it did not open. The ice was too thick. Evan raised his rifle and fired into the ice, the heat cracking it in jagged lines. The girl slammed her shoulder into the door, and it slid open just enough for them to slip inside. They entered a dark chamber. The wind cut off instantly, replaced by the muffled sound of the storm. Outside, the girl closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard, her breath glowing faintly. In the dark, Evan scanned the room. Shapes of alien machines stood frozen in place, covered in frost and dust, their surfaces marked with the same strange symbols he had seen before. The hum was louder here, resonating through the floor like a living heartbeat. The girl moved to a console at the far wall, her glowing fingers tracing over symbols as if searching for something. Evan watched the door, the clicking outside growing closer. The hunters were in the valley now, their steps slow, deliberate. Hunting. The girl pressed something on the console, and a hidden panel slid open, revealing a narrow shaft lit by faint blue lights spiraling downward into darkness. She looked at him and nodded. Evan hesitated, glancing back at the door, but the sound outside decided for him. They climbed into the shaft and began to descend, the cold metal rungs slick with frost. The hum grew stronger, the air warmer, the light brighter with every level they passed. Finally, the shaft opened into a massive underground chamber, its walls alive with streams of blue light flowing like rivers of energy. The girl stepped forward, her glow blending with the light around them. She looked back at Evan and spoke in a voice stronger than before. Safe here for now. Evan was not so sure. In the distance, deep in the shadows of the chamber, a faint green glimmer began to move slowly toward them. The underground chamber stretched wider than any space Evan had ever seen, the walls curving high above into darkness, while streams of blue light pulsed through veins in the stone like glowing rivers. Beneath transparent glass, the air was warm but heavy with a strange metallic scent that clung to his throat and made every breath feel thick. The alien girl moved ahead, her bare feet silent on the smooth floor, her glowing skin reflecting the light as if she belonged to this place. Evan followed close, his rifle ready, his eyes scanning the shadows for the faint green glimmer he had seen before. The hum filled the space, deep and constant, as if the walls themselves were breathing with some ancient heartbeat. The girl stopped at a raised platform in the center of the chamber, her hands hovering above a control panel that seemed grown from the floor rather than built. Symbols lit up under her touch, flowing outward in ripples of blue light across the platform and into the walls. Evan stepped closer, trying to read the shifting patterns, but they changed too quickly, each symbol morphing into another before he could fix it in his mind. The girl looked at him, her bright eyes serious. She pointed to the lights, then to the tunnel they had come from. Then she held her hand flat and swept it down sharply, as if sealing something away. Evan understood she was trying to lock the way behind them to keep the hunters out. A sudden vibration ran through the floor, making the streams of light flicker. The green glimmer in the far shadows moved closer and resolved into a shape. It was not one of the tall insect hunters, but something different, a small, hovering machine, its surface covered in shifting symbols, its eye a single glowing green lens that rotated slowly as it studied them. The girl tensed, but did not move, her hands still working over the panel. The machine drifted closer, silent, except for the faint hum of its movement. It stopped a few feet away from Evan and scanned him, a beam of green light sweeping up and down his body. Evan held his weapon steady, unsure if it was a threat. The girl said something in her own language, a short string of soft sounds. The machine responded with a series of clicks and a low tone, then backed away, hovering toward a side tunnel before vanishing. Into the dark, the girl relaxed slightly, but her hands kept moving over the panel, the streams of light around the room shifting faster, now forming complex webs that stretched across the walls and ceiling. Evan felt the floor tremble again, this time followed by a distant, echoing crack like ice breaking somewhere far above. The girl looked up sharply, her expression tightening. She pointed toward a newly opened passage on the far side of the platform, a narrow hallway glowing with the same blue light. They moved quickly across the chamber, the hum growing louder with each step, as if urging them forward. The hallway twisted and dipped, the walls smooth and warm under Evan's hand as he steadied himself against the turns. After several minutes, they entered a smaller chamber, circular with a domed ceiling, where dozens of crystal-like objects floated in the air, turning slowly as streams of light connected them in shifting patterns. The girl approached one of the crystals and touched it gently. It flared with bright light, and a shape formed above it, a projection of the frozen landscape above, showing the storm, the ridges, the valley, and tiny green lights moving across it. In hunting patterns, Evan realized they were seeing the hunters from above, each glowing dot marking their position. The girl zoomed the view with a motion of her hand, showing one cluster of green dots moving toward the ridge where they had descended, and another spreading out in a wide arc, as if searching. She pointed to the dots, then to herself, then to Evan, and then to the crystal she wore around her neck. Evan understood the hunters were tracking her, and whatever she carried, before he could speak aloud. Rumble shook the chamber, the image flickering. As dust rained down from the ceiling, a section of the wall split open, revealing another passage, but this one was dark and cold. Air poured from it, carrying the faint sound of clicks. The girl grabbed Evan's arm, pulling him toward a different exit on the opposite side of the room. They ran as the cold draft grew stronger, the sound of the clicks multiplying. They entered a wide corridor lined with tall columns of light, each one humming softly, the floor smooth and faintly glowing under their feet. Halfway down the corridor, a sharp metallic screech echoed behind them. The hunters were in the hidden chamber. The girl pushed harder, her breathing fast but steady, her eyes locked on a large set of doors. Ahead, the surface covered in glowing lines that pulsed like veins. She placed her hand on the door, and the lines surged brighter. The panels sliding apart with a deep resonant tone. Beyond was another vast chamber, this one filled with towering structures of glass and metal, their tops lost in the shadows above, streams of blue energy flowing between them, in arcs that hummed with power. The air here was warmer, softer, almost comforting, but Evan did not relax. The hunters were still coming, and the girl seemed to know it. She moved toward the center of the chamber, where a raised dais waited, a small round pedestal at its heart. She took the crystal from her neck and placed it into a groove on the pedestal. The entire room responded at once. The streams of energy flaring bright, the hum rising into a deep harmonic that seemed to vibrate through Evan's bones. The girl looked at him and spoke again, her voice quiet but firm. Safe for now, but not for long. The light from the crystal spread across the towering structures, sending streams of energy into the walls and ceiling until the entire chamber glowed like a captured dawn, and Evan could feel the warmth on his skin, like standing before a sun that never burned. The girl stepped back from the pedestal, her eyes fixed on the crystal, as if she feared to look away from it, even for a moment. A deep thrumming began in the floor, and Evan saw patterns moving under the surface, like rivers of light flowing toward the pedestal, converging on the crystal. Before shooting upward into the dark, the hum shifted to a low tone that rolled through the chamber like distant thunder. And in the air above the pedestal, an image began to form, faint at first, but growing clearer with each second. It was a sphere, half blue, half green, turning slowly, and Evan realized it was a map of a world, though not Earth, for the continents were strange and curved in ways that felt wrong to his eyes. The girl reached out to the glowing sphere, her fingers passing through it like mist, and when she touched a point on its surface, the image zoomed in, showing mountains and rivers and a great city built in spirals of white stone. Her voice was soft, almost reverent, as she spoke words in her language, her tone heavy with sadness. Evan felt the meaning more than understood it. The city was gone, the people scattered, and something ancient hunted them still. The image shifted again, this time showing a sky filled with dark shapes that blotted out the stars, and below them creatures that looked like the hunters, but larger, faster, and far more dangerous. The girl turned to Evan, her eyes fierce and bright. She pointed to the crystal, then to the sky in the image, and then to him. Evan shook his head, confused, until she touched the crystal and the sphere vanished, replaced by a new image, one that froze his breath. It was Earth, but not as it was now. The oceans darker, the land scorched in places, cities in ruin, and the same dark shapes in the sky above. The girl said a single word, and Evan understood this was a warning. The crystal was not just a key, it was a memory of her world, a record of what had happened, and a map of what was coming. The hum of the chamber grew louder, the air vibrating with energy. as if the place itself had heard the message and now waited for action. A sharp metallic clatter echoed through the doorway. They had entered the sound of the hunters, limbs striking the floor fast and close. The girl grabbed the crystal, and the light in the chamber dimmed to a soft glow. The image vanishing, she pulled Evan toward one of the side passages. A narrow path lined with thin pillars of glass, each humming softly as they passed. Evan's boots made almost no sound on the smooth floor, but the hunters behind were not silent, their clicks and screeches chasing them through the twisting path. They emerged into a room filled with tall, narrow windows that looked out into an underground canyon, lit by the same blue light that ran through the walls of the complex bridges of stone and metal stretched across the canyon, each one glowing faintly, as if alive. The girl led him to the nearest bridge, its surface smooth and warm under their feet as they crossed the deep space beneath them, echoing with distant rumbles. Halfway across the bridge, a figure rose from the shadows ahead. It was not a hunter, but another of the floating machines like the one they had seen earlier. Its green lens spinning as it scanned them. This time, it spoke a series of tones that formed a strange rhythm. The girl answered in the same pattern, and the machine moved aside, drifting to the edge of the bridge to let them pass. Evan glanced back and saw movement in the tunnel they had left. The hunters were on the bridge, now moving fast, their limbs scraping and striking the surface as they closed the distance. The girl touched the side of the bridge, and the surface under the hunters lit up, then cracked open, sending several of them plunging into the canyon below. Their screeches fading into the depths, they reached the far side and entered another carved tunnel, this one sloping upward, the air cooler and fresher with each step, as if leading them closer to the surface. The hum here was softer, almost like a whisper, and Evan realized it was coming from the crystal itself, faint but constant, as if it were alive at last. They emerged into a wide cavern, where pale light filtered down from cracks in the ceiling, far above the air, crisp and filled with the scent of frost. The girl stopped at the center of the cavern and placed the crystal on a low stone table, carved with more of the flowing symbols. A projection appeared above it, showing once again the dark shapes in the sky, this time moving toward a point marked in bright blue that Evan recognized as the region of Earth where his base was located. The girl pointed to the mark, then to herself, then to him, and finally to the path behind them. Evan understood she meant to take the fight to these things before they reached Earth, and she wanted him with her. The sound of the hunters echoed faintly from the tunnels below, but the girl did not move, her eyes locked on the projection. As if waiting for Evan's answer, he stepped forward and placed his hand beside hers on the stone table. The crystal pulsed, in response the blue mark on the projection, growing brighter as if sealing a choice. The girl gave a small nod, her expression set with determination, the hum from the crystal rising until it filled the cavern like a song of war. The sound in the cavern began to shift from the steady hum of the crystal to a deep rumble that came from the tunnels below, and Evan knew it meant the hunters were close again, their numbers growing and their speed increasing with every second. The girl lifted the crystal from the stone table, and its light flared brighter than before, spilling across the walls and ceiling, until every crack in the rock glowed like veins of living fire, and for a heartbeat, the hunters stopped their clicking, as if the light struck fear into them. She pulled Evan toward a narrow archway on the far side of the cavern, its entrance framed with symbols that shone faint blue as they stepped through, and the path beyond rose steep and fast. The walls, close enough for Evan to feel the vibrations of the hunters following the air, grew colder and sharper with every step, and a faint glow ahead hinted at the surface, but the girl moved with caution, as if she knew the way was not safe, and every shadow might hide something worse than the hunters. The tunnel widened into a long slope with rib-like supports, arcing overhead, each one humming with a faint metallic tone that shifted as they passed under them, and Evan wondered if it was some kind of ancient defense that had long since fallen silent. A sharp metallic screech echoed from behind, and Evan turned to see the first of the hunters pulling itself into the wider part of the tunnel, its body twisting unnaturally to fit through, and its glowing eyes fixed on them with unbroken hunger. The girl pressed her palm to one of the rib-like supports, and the hum in it changed to a rising wail. The floor beneath the hunter cracked with a sudden burst of light, and a section of the path dropped away, sending the creature tumbling into the darkness. But more shapes moved in the shadows below, and Evan knew it had only slowed them, not stopped them. They climbed faster, the walls beginning to shimmer with frost, as thin streams of cold air wrapped around them, carrying the scent of pine and open sky, and Evan felt a rush of hope that they might actually make it out at the top of the slope. A stone doorway stood half broken, its edges rimmed with ice, and beyond it was a wide shelf of rock, overlooking a valley bathed in silver light from a moon that hung low and heavy in the sky. The girl stepped onto the shelf and for a moment Evan forgot the hunters as he took in the view. The valley floor covered in strange glowing plants and rivers that shimmered like liquid glass, winding through dark forest. Then movement caught his eye in the sky above, a shape vast and silent. Gliding through the moonlight, its outline jagged and wrong, and even from this distance, Evan could see the faint glimmer of many eyes watching from its underside. The girl followed his gaze, her face hardening, as she pointed to the thing and then to the crystal as if to remind him why they had come. The rumble from the tunnel behind grew louder, the hunters spilling out onto the rock shelf, their claws clattering on the stone as they spread out, cutting off the path back down. Evan and the girl ran along the edge of the cliff, the path winding upward toward a narrow bridge of ice that connected to a ledge on the far side of the valley, the cold biting at his face as the wind rose. The bridge groaned under their weight, thin cracks spiderwebbing through it as they crossed, the hunters behind them moving just as fast, their screeches sharp against the whistling wind. Halfway across the bridge, the massive shape in the sky turned and began to descend, its shadow swallowing the moonlight, its many eyes now locked on them, and Evan felt a pressure in his head like a silent voice pushing against his thoughts. The girl stumbled, clutching the crystal tight, as if it shielded her from the pressure. She shouted a word over the wind, and Evan felt the air around them thicken, the ice beneath their feet glowing faint blue. The bridge surged with light, and the cracks began to seal the wind, pushing harder now, as if the very air wanted to carry them. Forward they reached the far side, and the girl collapsed to one knee, breathing hard. Evan pulled her up as the hunters poured onto the bridge behind them, but the glow in the ice flared suddenly bright, and the surface shattered under their weight, sending them plunging into the valley below, their cries fading into the distance. The great shape in the sky slowed, its descent hovering above the far side of the broken bridge, its many eyes unblinking as it watched them, its jagged outline shifting in ways that made Evan's vision blur. The girl grabbed his arm and pointed toward a dark opening in the cliff ahead. They ran inside, the sound of the wind cutting off abruptly as the passage swallowed them, and the glow from the crystal became their only light. The tunnel curved upward again, but the air here was different, warmer, and carrying a faint scent of smoke and metal, and somewhere ahead, Evan could hear a low rhythmic thump, like the heartbeat of some giant machine. They emerged into a cavern far larger than any they had seen yet, its walls lined with ancient machines half buried in ice and metal walkways that wound up toward a platform high above where a single towering door stood closed and silent. The girl moved toward the platform, her steps slow, as if each one carried weight, and Evan followed his eyes, scanning the shadows for movement, but finding only the cold stare of the machines. When they reached the door, the girl placed the crystal into a hollow at its center, and the sound of the heartbeat grew louder, the surface of the door rippling like water before it began to split open, revealing a light too bright to look at. Evan shielded his eyes and felt the warmth of the light on his face, and in that the moment he realized they were not stepping into the open night, but into something far stranger, something that waited for them as if it had been expecting this moment for a very long time.